let's spill the tea on the books I have read. It is officially the start of December, which means November is over, obviously. I mean, that's usually how time goes. I'm a little reluctant to let go of November just because I feel like I wanted to do so much more in November and I just didn't get the chance to do it. It was so busy. I had my exams, but we're not here to talk about my personal life. We're here to talk about the things that I read in November. So November was a really great reading month. Once again, I read a total of 14 books, all of which seem to be from my actual TBR, which is great for my numbers in terms of actually getting my TBR read. As you can see, it's quite extensive, but I'm really excited to talk all about the things that I read. I think first things first, let's just talk about the books that I am in the middle of, that I've kind of read quite a bit of in November. So the first one that I have is Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. That's what I'm about just over a third of a way in, and I'm really enjoying it. You'll probably hear a little bit more about it in my actual December wrap-up, but at the moment I am reading this and enjoying. I really did wish I finished this in November just because it is such a fun read. It's spooky, sort of, but it's very more gothic. I think it's giving me a lot of gothic feelings. I am also reading The Atlas Paradox by Olivia Blake, but I am almost halfway through with The Atlas Paradox. I read nearly 200 pages of this in November. I'm currently trudging through it. We'll see how it goes. I am also then reading The Priory of the Orange Tree. I've read about 200 pages of this so far. I'm hoping to continue and hopefully finish in December. And that kind of concludes all of the books that I'm currently in the middle of, that I started in November and will hopefully and probably finish in December. Let's go ahead and jump straight on in to the books that I actually finished in November. So I decided to start off this November with a very super easy read, mainly because I felt like I was maybe going to head into a slump if I didn't read it, and I picked up The Demon in the Wood by Leigh Bardugo and Danny Pendergast. I actually just recently hauled this as well. I have that linked up in the info cards, and I really enjoyed this. So I gave this 5 stars. I really do like the Shadow and Bone trilogy. I hated the ending of it, but I feel like the relationship between Alina, I think that's her name, and the Darkling. So I'm a massive fan of that, and I was really happy that this was released. This is kind of a Darkling origin story, and I'm really hoping that they release more within this series. This is kind of volume 0, if you will, in the world of the Grishaverse. So I'm really happy that I read it. There's a lot of like little moments, and the art in this is just fantastic. You can kind of already see it just based off of the cover. I then moved from one graphic novel to the next, and I picked up Lore Olympus volume 2. This I was really excited to read, mainly because I enjoyed volume 1. I'll have my October wrap up in the info cards for you, but I enjoyed volume 1, and I kind of felt like I did want to continue on with it, and I actually adored volume 2. I'm so excited for volume 3, which has been released today in South Africa, which is insane. Today's the 1st of December, but I am really loving this so far. I think it's gonna be great. Obviously I can read ahead of the volumes that are being published by just reading it on Webtoon, but I'm a massive fan of reading these physically just because the quality of paper and the actual artwork is fantastic. This is another book that I gave 5 stars to just because it was just a fun reading experience. I know graphic novels tend to be quite difficult for people to rate. For me, I tend to go along the lines of, did I like the art? Did the storyline make any kind of sense? Is it easy to follow? Do I look forward to reading more? Like that kind of stuff, you know, just basic feelings. We started reading It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover in October with the Jonathan Ball read-along, and then we finished it in November, which I'm really happy about. A lot of people have mixed feelings on this because some people are saying it was so unnecessary, other people are saying they really enjoyed it. I'm falling more towards the line of people who did enjoy it. I thought this was great. I was really angry with the ending of It Ends With Us, and it made me so frustrated, but this kind of made me less frustrated. I really did like this. I did think this is definitely for the fans. I mean, she even says it in the beginning and at the back that she wouldn't have written a sequel. She had no intention of writing a sequel, except for the fans who then kept pestering, and so she decided to just write one, I guess, to get people to stop messaging her saying, write the sequel, write a sequel. And I think she also found that this was very cathartic for her and herself. But yeah, I really enjoyed this a lot more. I ended up giving this 4 stars, but it's probably more along the lines of 3.5, 4. I enjoyed this. It isn't anything great by any means, but it is a cute story. I also started Belladonna in October. I'm really sorry if you can hear the lawnmowers. They are going off today. I started Belladonna in October and finished it within November, and I was buddy reading this. So I buddy read this with Velvet Library. I'll have her linked down below for you to check out. And I really enjoyed it. I will say that in the beginning, I was kind of a little bit unsure. I feel like it definitely takes us some time to really get used to not only the descriptions within the book, but just the overall vibe and kind of where the story is going. This is definitely a mystery fantasy-esque novel. I gave this one 4 stars. My general feelings is this was suddenly gothic. I think that this is definitely very lush in terms of descriptions. I enjoyed the plot a lot and I am really looking forward to the sequel, but this just didn't really pull me in straight away and it didn't really feel like a 5-star. Moving on, I also finally finished Lightlock by Alex Astor. This is a proof copy that I was given at work. Essentially, I like this. I gave this also 4 stars. There's a lot of like really high ratings and I did enjoy this. I liked the ending more than I liked the beginning of this. For me, the beginning, if I was to rate it, was more of a 3-star, and the ending was a lot better, but I felt like the ending was rushed and so much attention was paid to the beginning, so I kind of wish the level of detail was split between the two, so I really could have gotten everything. I felt like there were some unnecessary parts in here, but overall I enjoyed it. I didn't think it was anything incredible, like don't get me wrong, it's not amazing, but it was enjoyable and I will probably pick up the sequel when it comes out, I think next year. Then I've read This Vicious Grace by Emily Thied. This is also another one that I was not the biggest fan of in the beginning. I think I was really entering into a slump at this point, but I pushed through, I read it, and I really enjoyed the ending. This is more like a 3.75 than a 4 in my opinion, just because of that beginning. I really trudged through about half of it before I just sat down and read it in one kind of go, the last half of the book. I did enjoy the premise of this. This was really interesting, but I was a much bigger fan of the characters in This Vicious Grace than I was of Lightlock, which is why it's kind of a stronger story for me. I was definitely more attracted to these characters, and we kind of have like an enemies to lovers situation, which I'm always a fan of. We did have that in Lightlock, but I feel like it was a little bit underdeveloped in Lightlock. I then read The Mysterious Case of the Alphaton Angels. This is by Jonas Hallett and it's coming out next year in January. I absolutely love this one. I do think that the ending is going to be very polarizing for some people, but I really thoroughly enjoyed it. This is told through emails and WhatsApp messages and interviews and stuff like that, but I really enjoyed this. This is kind of like one of my favorite medias of books because I think they're just really fantastic and I'm a massive fan of this. I rated this 5 stars and I really can't wait to get my hands on a final copy just because this book was incredible. And then finally, after months of saying I was going to read this book, I finally read Girl Forgotten by Karen Slaughter. I did listen to the audiobook of this one, which is kind of easy to follow. I will say that I think that the pieces of her audiobook is a little bit more difficult to follow. This one is slightly easier. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 stars as well. Really good reading month. This was a really great sequel. I will say you should read pieces of her before you pick up Girl Forgotten. Some people are saying you don't need to, and technically yes you don't, but I think you should. There's a lot of context in pieces of her that you kind of would need to read Girl Forgotten. I'm much more of a fan of Andrea in this one than I was in the first book. I think she really comes into her own within this book and we see a lot of character development and I look forward to following her along her journey. I hope it's one of those like 12-book series, honestly, because I really do enjoy her character. I think she's very interesting, very real life like. I then decided to pick up A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin, and this was just a fun read. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's a smashing time. It's perfect for people who enjoyed Bridgerton or like just Regency romance without smut. This is very clean in my opinion. I really enjoyed it. It's got like a little mystery. There's a lot of humor. And I'm really going to keep an eye on Sophie Irwin's other works because I definitely think I'll be interested in those. This was just a really fun read. Highly recommend it, actually. Moving from like a light little romance to a dark fantasy romance, I finally read the second book in the Painted Prisoner series, Glint by Raven Kennedy. I gave this one 4.5. This is probably the only one where I've actually given a true half star to because I loved this so much. I really enjoyed how we continued from the first book. This is definitely a lot more of a character development, world building kind of book, but I actually really enjoyed that aspect of this book. I thought it was fantastic and I'm really a massive fan of this cast of characters. I'm really excited to see where the story goes. From here, I don't want to spoil too much, but I definitely think that Auren is coming into herself. There were so many moments in this book where I was so frustrated at her, but I think that was for a good rhyme and reason, and I really am looking forward to reading Gleam, which is the third book. I then read Fairy Tale by Stephen King, and I DNF'd this one. I DNF'd it at page 430. This was pretty much right towards the end where I DNF'd it, and it just got to the point where I stopped caring about the characters, and I'm someone who really needs to care about the characters to get through a plot that I'm not enjoying. So usually if it's a plot that I enjoy, I'll push through even if it's characters I don't like, but if it's plot that I don't enjoy and characters that I don't enjoy, I tend to DNF. But with this one, I felt like there was so much unnecessary detail, and I understand that maybe that's just Stephen King's way of writing, but I feel like this should have just gone through a really strict round of edits, in my opinion. There were some really good gold pot moments in this, but I feel like it completely got overshadowed by this very unnecessary detail and unnecessary focus to things that would never matter in the future. Like they didn't correlate or correspond with anything that happened further along in the book, and usually I'm someone who doesn't care about detail, but this one, it was just so cumbersome to read this book. I did feel like the detail of this felt more like it was lining up to be a series, but this is conclusive. This is a standalone fantasy-esque book. I think this will appeal to so many people who kind of like a magic realism-esque story. This is a fantasy world set within our own, but kind of hidden, and it has such a great premise and such a great everything, except I didn't care towards the end. I then picked up Ghost Reaper Girl. This is a volume 1 in a series by Ikisa Sake, I think is how you say her name. I like this one. I gave this one 3 stars. I think that it's very juvenile, the writing, even though we follow a 28-year-old protagonist. It's very juvenile in its writing, even though it even says here like rated for older teens, but that's just because of content. The actual writing is very young. I am keen to read more in this series, but I don't think I'll go out of my way to search for it. I then finally took it upon myself to reread The Atlas 6. If you don't know, I read this earlier in the year as an audiobook. Big mistake, in my opinion. The audiobook only has 1 narrator, and I really do think it does a disservice for this book because we follow 6 narrators in here. 6 people who have different thoughts, different opinions, and when I was listening to the audiobook, they kind of all just bled into each other quite a lot. But I reread this physically. I actually enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. I did find that the writing in this book is so inaccessible. It's generally a critique I have for dark academia books because honestly, I do not understand why the writing must be so wordy and focus on words that not common, like people who just speak the language, who speak English as a second language, will probably not know. I think that makes this book very, very inaccessible and very also cumbersome to read. I did enjoy the plot of it, but I don't know if I'd ever reread it unless something really good happens in the 2nd and 3rd book. Then the last book I read this month was The Whispering Dark by Kaylee Andrews. This is my Illumicrate edition. I'll have that linked up in the info cards if you're interested to check that out. I gave this one 4 stars. I think this book is fantastic. There's death rep in here and its own voices. I did feel like the relationship in this could have been explored a little bit more. I feel like it's a little too insta-lovey for me, but overall I think this premise was really cool. I actually thought it was going to be a series, but it's conclusive and that's okay. Sometimes it's better to just have a standalone book. I did think it works really well as a standalone. It's really fantastic. I really like the themes that were explored in this one, and as I said, there's fantastic deaf rep in here because the author herself is deaf. So if you're looking for that kind of representation, you can definitely find it within this book. And that's the tea on all of the books that I read in November. Please let me know down below in the comments what you read in the month of November. If there's anything that you want to comment, let me know. I also am curious to know if you prefer for wrap-ups to have more kinds of stats. I do think that I personally fall within the it depends on how I'm feeling. Sometimes I would want to know a lot more stats, like how many 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, the works, what kind of genres you read the most from in that month. I do think I want to start doing what like Books and Lala does, where there's a quarterly wrap-up where you can see all of that stats, and I think that's maybe when I will go into more detail, unless you would want it in this kind of video. But overall, I'm really pleased with my month, and I'm hoping that December goes just as well. I really do want to have a really strong end to the year, and I'm hoping that December will be that month for me. We'll see though. It's only the first day, and I'm in the middle of 3 books, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, so we'll see how that all goes. But otherwise, thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.